So I
Hmm.
guess with that, maybe we should start our exploration of the Fabian Society.
Yeah, so the Fabian Society itself utilized just that very technique, as you just mentioned, what was dubbed permeation theory. To understand the Fabian Society, though, I think it's important to get at what is it and where did it come from. It is something which had really shaped and distorted, along with several other key top-down think tanks run out of London, the entire 20th century. And it was created at the end of the 19th century, which is a very important period. Now, utilizing this method of permeation theory that had been developed by people like Lord Bertrand Russell, a leading Fabian Society member, George Bernard Shaw, who's known as a literary figure, but really was a radical devout eugenicist. As all of these members, it's almost like a precondition for the most part. You had to have been a radical devout eugenicist in order to be a true Fabian. Um, there are many others. H.G. Wells, Lord Halford Mackinder, many people whose ideas went on to shape the paradigm of war and division and brutalization of the entire 20th century, including the push for a scientific dictatorship. These were all groups that organized themselves around the Fabian Society. There were different branches to it, in terms of an educational processing factory that was set up in the 1890s called the London School of Economics, which was sort of a zone created by Fabians with Rothschild funding to find talent around the world and process them in the halls of the Fabian, social engineers, and then send them back either to do work in Britain itself or in other parts of the world. Um, the political party that was created in 1900 by the Fabians was known as the Labour Party. Um, and the idea was to just simply do nothing less than completely uh, transform the entire foundation of society under a mass behavioral modification scheme and create a new type of humanity founded on certain ideas located in the writings of Karl Marx, which themselves repackaged a lot of the core poisonous ideas in the Darwinian system of natural selection. That particular model, and there were many models. It's not like you have to be a Darwinian or a creationist that believes literally in the Bible.
Okay, so this is in Marx's writings that this comes from? Because I've never really heard. I mean, I haven't like read all
Yeah,
this stuff myself, yeah. Just kind of familiar with the general stuff, but I don't really hear people refer to, Marx's writings as sort of having that Darwinian flavor to it. So which can you be a little more specific about which bits you're talking about?
yeah, sure. Like Marx described on Darwinism, he said that Darwin's work is most important and suits my purpose in that it provides a basis in natural science for the historical class struggle. He also
Huh.
devoted his first German edition of Das Kapital to Darwin. Engels, who was sort of Marx's handler, I don't think Marx fully understood. Kind of like Engels was to Marx what Thomas Huxley was to Darwin as Darwin's bulldog, right? His handler. Engels had written that Marx was, quote, simply striving to establish the same gradual process of transformation demonstrated by Darwin in natural history as a law in the social field. Now, whether that's true or not, since the Marxist view does postulate that there are these bursts, these periodic bursts of revolution between the proletariat and the rich, holders of productive enterprises. I don't know if Engels was being all that honest, but the fact that these guys were all basically trying to repackage some core ideas. And the idea of the Fabians was rather than do things the old fashioned way, which the British Empire had been doing for, it became really an empire in earnest in I think the early 1700s. Maybe I'd say even maybe with the advent of the Bank of England after the Glorious Revolution, which involved sort of the deep state of Britain taking full control, and whatever legitimate humanists and nationalists were in Britain formerly were completely destroyed at the end of that process with the death of Queen Anne in 1710 or 1714. But at that point, Britain really became the center control, the hive of this global empire, where it began a process of increasing colonization, the utilization of usury and speculation to undermine its victims. And that process was destructive oftentimes because it necessitated periodic wars, um, heavy-handed suppression when you had things like, for example, Indians, um, in the crown jewel of the empire, periodically uprising for their rights and freedoms, and then you had to have the British go down and crush them and kill millions periodically just to put them back in their place. It got very messy, and it was risky for the empire itself too, because by having these wars, sometimes it risked the empire losing control of the system that they were trying to manipulate, or themselves getting blown up. So the Fabian Society method, which grew out of a group that was associated with a group um, called the Fellowship of the New Life, basically another group of British elites trying to create a new religion, a new type of. It sounds kind of innocuous on the surface, like they want a world where our spirits and bodies live in harmony, and a new world that could supersede the Judeo-Christian sort of matrix, utilizing a lot of theosophical Eastern, like a certain version of Eastern mysticism that they're fascinated by, which I don't even think is legitimately Eastern. I think that they're perverting a lot of it. But anyway, that was sort of what people like Alfred Wallace, who co-wrote or was given writing credits for with Darwin, of writing the Origin of Species in 1859. So he was a leading member of that group. And so out of that group came the more practical political aspect, which was the Fabian Society, just 2 years after the Fellowship of the New Life was created. And Beatrice and Sidney Webb were two among the many, as I mentioned a few of them already, eugenicists and social engineers who were like, okay, let's get rid of this old school heavy-handed approach of overt violence to keep control of the empire, and instead let's use something a little bit longer term. Let's have a longer wave approach to history as we permeate slowly and we'll adapt ourselves and infuse ourselves into everything that has influence everywhere in the world possible, and we'll think increasingly transgenerationally. So we need to have more patience. So the term Fabian that they chose, and again, it was created in 1884, was based on the name of a Roman general named Fabius Maximus, who had developed a technique of attrition, basically destroy your enemy, not avoid head-on assault at all costs, and just simply use attrition. So avoid war, use intrigue and subterfuge as much as possible, cause confusion within your enemy's ranks as possible, but slowly by attrition, when they're weak and they've used up all their supplies, then you can go and attack. You could lay it down. Part of one of the symbols that were crafted by George Bernard Shaw, who I mentioned earlier, was a disgusting, rabid eugenicist who called for periodically forcing everybody in the world to justify their existence under a panel of population control, like a population control panel of
Oh my
experts.
god. Yeah. I can think of some people today who would love to institute that kind of system.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's a little bit too real when you listen to the writings of. Well, I mean, there's this one guy who was, I think, the first person. They call him Dr. Death, because
Oh,
he was the
that's
first person to do a.
nice.
It's I think he actually takes pride in it, but I forget his real name. But he was the first doctor to do a legal euthanasia in Europe in
Oh,
1996.
it
You
begins
heard
with a
about him,
K,
right?
doesn't it? I can't remember it.
Yeah, it's escaping me
It's right
too, but he
there.
called for this
Yeah.
horrific idea of, like, implanting everybody with some poisonous chip, like, that has a fluid that would kill you pretty quickly if
Mhm.
you cannot press a button at the same time every day. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that way, if your neurological faculties ever,
If you
like,
start
went.
becoming senile, then you just die. Yeah. Mhm.
But yeah, so, these guys had this slower idea, but it didn't take off immediately. So that was one sort of, you can consider it an early think tank. And the thing